Okay, so like I said, this is your last project of your class for the semester. It should be the best thing that you have done for the semester, right? Because now you have more skills and more practice and more knowledge than you ever have at any point in your art career, right? So that's why I'm giving this to you a little bit early so that you can kind of think about it, kind of work through your ideas mentally. Things will be stronger that way. And there is a research component, like I said, we're going to talk about that. And I want you to have a little bit extra background time to kind of look through some things and find some really good stuff that is actually helpful for you. All right, so this is our final project. It is based on things in your sketchbook. So as Art 2 students, you did this in Art 1, if you had me as your Art 1 teacher. So this should feel fairly familiar, except for, I don't remember if the research component was a part of it, depending on when you took Art 1, that may be new to you, okay? So think of this like a math problem. You're gonna take your sketchbook, okay? You have all of the ideas that you created in your sketchbook in quarter 3 and quarter 4. So you have, almost 60 pages by now. You are adding to that the techniques and the concepts and the terms and the skills that you learned this semester. So to help you kind of reflect and review what those were, you have your whole vocab page in your sketchbook that we've been adding to throughout the different units. That's a big part of why that is there, to kind of be a list to remind you what we learned, what it all means, has a review for you. So you're going to look through that. And then you're going to add this research component to that. So you guys have researched throughout this semester. You've looked at reference images. You've used research to help you brainstorm and to come up with ideas. And you can continue using research in that way, or you can find a different way to kind of push how you're using research and expand upon it a little bit. Okay? So you're going to develop some idea, or maybe a combination of ideas, from your sketchbook. It could be, like I said, a combo of multiple sketchbook ideas, or it could be a part of a sketchbook idea that you're going to now kind of take in a different direction. And you're going to add all those 3 components and combine them into a fully finished, fully developed artwork, okay? And you're doing that by incorporating those skills and those techniques that you learned this semester, and then you're elevating that idea with some influence from your research. Okay, so I used the term show-off project before. You should really be using this to show everything that you have, everything that you know, everything that you learned, to show where your skills are at, right? How they have grown from all the different things that you have done this semester and previous classes, okay? So, like I said, you're going to look back to that vocabulary page. You're going to pick at least 4 to 5 of those concepts from that vocabulary page to incorporate into your project idea, okay? The big thing here, and the reason that we can get away without having like a separate art exam for the finals, is because that you need to be able to fully explain how you're using each of those terms or those concepts or those skills in your project, how that term applies to your project. So that explanation is really, really important. That's what's taking the place of a written exam, okay? So in other words, you're proving that you know and that you understand not only what it means, but also how you are applying it and what effect it's having on your work. Now maybe, ideally, that feels easy to you because those are the type of comments that we've been making all semester in our critiques. You've been reflecting on each other's work that way. So it's the same skill, we're just kind of taking it up to the level of a final exam, right? As a review, okay, this is what Art 1 did this semester, this is what Art 2 did this semester. I'm keeping things a little general because I'm recording this one, I'm going to post it for all the classes. But that will help you kind of jog your memory as to what we actually accomplished this semester, which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of projects for a 1 semester period. That's 18 weeks, right? Something like that. So you guys did a lot, right? This is what painting did. So here are just some of the kind of our big kind of heavy hitter kind of keywords. You probably have more than this in your sketchbook right now on your vocab list, but these are some of the ones that I think are kind of the easiest to apply in a general sense, or that can apply to a lot of different ideas. So this will be in, I'll post these slides for you, okay, this will be in there. I also gave you some guiding questions. So for example, if you want to use unity and variety as a concept in your work, the guiding question could be, how do you balance those things to make the work engaging, right? Or if you want to use proportion, okay, what sizes are you suggesting in your work? How do they compare to each other? What effect does that have on the audience, okay? If you're using symbolism, think back, you guys did your journey mandalas at the beginning of the semester in Art 2. So we use symbolism a lot in that one. What are you suggesting or referring to? What is the message that you're communicating, right? So it's more than just saying, okay, I'm going to use line, and I'm going to use color, and I'm going to use rhythm, but you have to be able to explain how you're actually using that, how you're actually applying it, and because you're using that in that way, what effect does that have on your viewer and on how your artwork comes across? Does that make sense? Okay, so this is not just kind of like surface level, oh, I'm going to throw a vocab word in here, right? But you actually have to be able to explain it, to apply it, and to articulate how it's being used in a significant way that shows that you understand it. Okay, so you're showing your learning. That's the big deal here. Okay, now I mentioned that there's this research component, right? So you guys have used research so far to look up things like reference images, to improve your accuracy if you're drawing something. You guys have used that a lot. You have also used research in ways to give you ideas, right? To help you kind of think of things, to help you brainstorm, okay? You could look up other artists for inspiration. Many of you have already done that numerous times. You could consider things like art history, so art from ago, right? Or contemporary art, the way artists are using concepts now in present times. You could use your research to add complexity from other ideas you find. So maybe you have an idea, you kind of have things sketched out, but you need that extra little bit of push to kind of elevate it, to make it more complex. Your research can help you find ways to do that, okay? You also might use research to influence the content or the subject matter, so to help you find ideas for what to create, okay? You could use your research to influence things like proportions, or the angles you use, or the viewpoint you use. So maybe, I'm just going to throw an idea out there, maybe you want to do a portrait, okay? But you use your research and you look up some different portrait artists, and you find an artist that creates portraits from a different angle than you were considering. And so you take your subject matter that you were already planning, and you just switch up the angle based on what you saw in your research. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're going to explain not only how you're using those vocab words, but then also how your research has influenced your idea, how your idea is now different and better and elevated because of something you saw in your research. Okay, and that can be like a really obvious connection, like I saw the color scheme of pink and green in an artwork in my research, and so I'm going to incorporate pink and green and make those my dominant colors in my artwork now. That's a really like obvious kind of clear connection. But your connection from your research could be more vague. It could be this artist looks at things from unusual angles, so I'm going to pick an unusual angle to show my subject. Okay, that's a little bit more abstract line of connection. Does that make sense? You on board so far? Okay. So I'm going to show you some examples. These are the same examples that we looked at in Art 1, so they might look familiar. Disclaimer, the examples that I'm showing you are not from Art 1 or Art 2 or from any of the classes that we do here. So the assignments that they are kind of leading off of are not the same as the assignments that you guys have done, but what is the same is how they're taking vocabulary words and art terms and art concepts and making them into their own thing. And you guys will be doing the same thing. So these 3 works are an expressive line series. So this student wanted to pick a different word for each artwork and then make lines kind of exemplify or personify or communicate that word without writing the word in a really obvious kind of way. So I think the first word was something like calm or movement or something like that. The second word was explosive. The third word might be organic. I can't remember what it was. So they used the different line qualities, right, to express the different words and the different feelings. The cool thing about doing a series is like multiple parts to make up one kind of art group of artworks. A series is nice because if you are somebody that doesn't want to stress about whether you're going to finish or whether you're going to finish too early and then have extra time, a series is a really good way to approach that because you can kind of keep doing parts of the series and then when you run out of time, you're just done. So it's a really good way to use your time in a way that's really efficient, but also you're not going to feel that stress of like, oh, I have 2 days left and I have a lot more work to do to finish this one piece. It's a little bit more flexible, okay? So that's one idea, okay? And you do not have to take, I'm not suggesting that you take these ideas and like use them directly. I'm just showing you how other students have interpreted incorporating those terms, okay? So this one was an intricate line drawing. The student worked with texture in repeating all of the little line work. They worked with values. So if you squint at this, you can see some areas appear darker, some areas appear lighter, and they did that by using the different line spacing and different densities of the different little line work areas to create the illusion of those different values. They use things like overlapping, they use things like rhythm and repetition to repeat all of the lines. They used things like, we talked about density, we talked about texture. Movement is a big one here. So the horizontal lines feel a little bit more calm and stable, and then the curvy lines in the flames feel like they have more activity, more visual movement to kind of pull your eye around. They also used asymmetry, right? So your focus is really pulled all the way to that right side, but then the rest of the design keeps your eye moving throughout the composition, but it does not have that kind of symmetrical balance feeling. It's balanced, but there is still asymmetry about it. So that's that one. This one is a still life. So the student set up a little arrangement, much like you saw the painting students do, much like you guys did with your fruit drawing. They put a light on it and they chose objects and items that were within a similar color scheme and color palette. So lots of warm colors here. They talked about analogous colors, meaning colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. They talked about using highlights and shadows to create depth and dimension. A lot of us interpret that as things looking realistic, right? When things look like they are 3D, they have dimensionality to them. This student worked with asymmetrical balance again in their composition, so that major item here, this like glass spirally vase thing, was not in the center of the composition, it was off to the side, so how could they balance that with the folds in the fabric in the background, things like that. So there's all those different skills pulled in and incorporated. This student did an intricate cut paper collage, okay, similar to what you guys are doing, maybe a little bit different take on it. So they worked with things like repetition. They worked with symmetrical balance on this one, where it is the same on both sides. They worked with color contrast. So some of the color pairings, like for example the blue and the red here, where the green and the orange have very high contrast. They are very far apart on the color wheel. And then some other areas, like green and blue, right, are much closer on the color wheel, so they are lower contrast areas. So kind of working to balance those areas of contrast. This is also an enlargement. So the way, like the size this looks compared to me right now is much larger than it was in real life. This label right here is the same size as the labels we used on the cabaret boards. So if you think about how big this is in real life, it's much smaller. So the level of intricacy of all that cutting and all those little like placements of all the little pieces becomes much more challenging and detailed when you think of the actual size of it and the scale. So working with proportion, right, and the creating difficulty and complexity that way, right? I can't remember the number of layers. I feel like I used to know how many actual layers were on top of each of the base layers. It's quite a few. It was a real undertaking. This student worked with a colored version similar to a grid portrait enlargement. Obviously it's not a human, but she did work from a photo, and then she worked a lot with the color pairings. So we have complementary colors in the blue and the orange, right? And then she also worked with using those complementary colors to create depth and distance. So not only do warm colors like reds and oranges feel like they are advancing towards the viewer, they tend to feel like they're a little closer to us because we're used to seeing blue in the sky, right, as far away. So we tend to view cooler colors as receding towards the background, so she's creating depth that way. But then she also uses very, very intense, bright, vivid, strong colors with high contrast up towards the front that feel like they're closer to the viewer. And then what is happening to the colors in the background to make them feel farther away? They're darker, they're duller, there's less contrast, there's less detail, right? So all of those different factors are helping to create that illusion of depth and distance, okay? Obviously highlights and shadows are a big one here. You could talk about unity and variety in the, I'm gonna call them brush strokes, but it's colored pencil, right? Like the pencil strokes. We talked about contrast, we talked about, we have asymmetrical balance again, that's a big one. Whenever you wanna work with balance, it tends to be more challenging to balance asymmetrically than to have things be the same on both sides. Okay, so something to think about if you are thinking about complexity and ways to kind of elevate your work. This student worked with, again, asymmetry. We have a very particular color scheme in this one. This is a double complement color scheme. So there's two complementary pairs. Can you figure out what they are? Purple and, well, purple and, what's the complement of purple? Yellow, and then orange and blue. Yep, so that's a double complementary color scheme. So that's a way to elevate, right? That's a more complicated color scheme. We said asymmetrical balance, lots of repetition in this one, definite balance of unity and variety. We see unity in all these little kind of tile-like squares that are repeated, and then we see variety in the other kind of painterly, kind of loose brushwork. We see the suggestion of some symmetry in that we have like the two halves of the mask, but they're both different, and they're not presented actually symmetrically, right? They're asymmetrically placed. Composition in this one is a big one. Movement, how she's leading your eye throughout the different pieces. Movement tends to be a little bit easier to accomplish asymmetrically versus symmetrically. When things are symmetrical, they tend to feel a little more like stable. So it's something to think about, right? Does this make sense? Okay. This one's probably the closest to what you guys experienced with your grid portraits. So this was meant to be an extension of the grid portrait assignment. So she picked a photo that had a much more complicated facial expression. It also has hands, so that was ways that she kind of picked more complexity and more difficulty and kind of amped up that level of skill in her work. And then instead of shading, she used red, blue, and yellow markers to do hatching and cross-hatching to create the different levels of value. So she's incorporating proportions from the grid, she's incorporating values through hatching and cross-hatching. Again, we have kind of movement throughout the composition in this really active pose. So all of those different types of skills, she used a triadic color scheme, so that's a pretty high contrast color scheme, and then had to decide where to place each of the colors so that things would still look balanced. Okay, balance is a big one. That is easy to, well, I don't want to say easy. It's easy to incorporate it, to make it apply to all sorts of different projects. And that's a good skill to also work on. It tends to be pretty general. This student did a narrative piece, so in other words, she was a little bit more illustrative. She was kind of suggesting a story or like some sort of action either had happened or was about to happen. So she included a lot of really illustrative detail. So we see things like the suggestion of characters in like this like wolf-like character. We see this creature over here that's kind of suggested but not totally revealed. And then we see some other details that suggest that activity in the story, right? So we see like the red on this one, we see the scratch marks in the tree here, we see the kind of like smoke, fog kind of environment that is happening. And then we also see all these details that she incorporated to show depth and space. So we see that the rocks are much larger towards the bottom of the canvas, where we interpret that as being closer to the viewer, and then the details are much smaller as they go into the background. We see the incorporation of a light source in the moon, right? And then we see how that interacts with all of the other figures. So we see there's like rim lighting. This is very photographic here on the character here. We see the light on all the trees on the side that faces the moon, and then we see the reciprocal shadows on the other side. We see some complementary colors in the kind of orange and the blue. And then we have green and red kind of playing off of each other as well. So we see colors chosen really intentionally and with purpose. There is not every color, you know, in the rainbow, so to speak, in this painting. It's kind of limited, so that limited palette again. And then all of those different things that showed depth in that space to kind of create that environment and that sense of what is going on in that space. Does that all make sense? What do you guys see in this one? I just gave you a whole ton of different examples. What art terms could you pick out of this one?
Symmetry.
Symmetry. How do you see symmetry?
The butterfly, like both wings are the same, and like the little antenna things.
Yep. So if we look at the outline of the butterfly, it's very symmetrical. It's the same on both sides. These are both the same. Yep. What else? We see symmetry, but we also see the opposite of that, which is what? Yep.
Asymmetry.
Asymmetry. How do we see asymmetry?
And the different wings, like one's a nighttime scene and one's a daytime scene.
So the outline of the butterfly is symmetrical, but within that space of each butterfly wing, it's not symmetrical. So that's asymmetry, right? And then beyond that, we see one is night, one is daytime. How else do we see the idea of opposites within those two sides?
The colors.
Colors are kind of opposite, right? Cool colors, warm colors. What else? What were you gonna say?
Also, on the left side, like the grass is towards the top, and then like there's like green towards the bottom at the other side, and then
Yep.
there's lighter blue at the bottom, and then blue at the top.
Yes, so it's almost kind of like yin yang, right? How it's green and blue over here, and then it's green and blue-ish, right, over here. That's a really good observation. Other opposites or other things, terms, skills that you noticed? we could say that this is near and far, right? You could also say that in order to create that illusion of close and far depths, right, we use proportion and scale. So the flowers here are really, really big. They're like the size of my hand up close, right? And then if I take that same hand and put it over here, the building is smaller than my hand. We know that the flower would be bigger, or excuse me, would be smaller than the building, right? So using that proportion and that size difference to show depth, right? Same thing you could argue with the horse and the flower. Other things that you notice? Some sense of highlight and shadow in here, more on this side than in this side. We had depth, right? So creating that illusion of near and far within the space. We talked about balance, both symmetrical and asymmetrical. We talked about warm colors, cool colors. Okay, so there's a ton of different things within here, right? So it'll be up to you to determine how you're going to pull from that vocabulary list, pull from your research, what idea from your sketchbook you're gonna start with as your starting point, okay? Now you could take, you know, a simple sketch. Maybe you drew a flower one day, right? That could have been what this started with. This could have started with maybe they drew a flower one day, maybe they drew a butterfly one day, and they kind of combined those ideas and then added a bunch more to it. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can use the content and the material that you already have in your sketchbook and then develop it and really add to it and grow it into a full-blown project, okay? Really think about the development. So it's more than just when we do like a 1 or a 2 day project. This is like a 2-week project. Does that make sense? Okay, so like we said, this is your last opportunity to show the full potential of your skills and what you have learned. It should be the best one that you've done. So think about like you're showing off, like this is a job interview. You wanna prove everything that you've learned and to what extent now you can actually use that stuff to make your own art, okay? So on this proposal, I did send these to print. We can have somebody go pick them up at the library. This is what you're going to fill out between now and next week, Wednesday, I want to say. So this is where you're going to describe your original sketchbook idea. What is the kind of the trigger inspiration idea that you're pulling from your sketchbook, okay? And then what major techniques and concepts are you going to incorporate with that? And the important part, what do they mean and how are they applying? What effect are they having? This part is really important because you're getting graded on this on the rubric side, okay? Then, number 3 is summarize the ideas you found in your research and how those ideas will influence your work. So I want to actually see, okay, my idea was going to be this before, but since I looked up that research, this is what I found in my research, and now this is how my idea has changed, and this is how it's going to be different and impacted by that research. And then all of that comes together, 1 + 2 + 3, and this is kind of a rough sketch of what my plan is roughly going to look like. Okay, so think of this part kind of like a rough draft in really small form. All right, you're gonna fill all this out, and then next week, I think it's Wednesday, well, I'll have to look at that date. I will have a one-on-one check-in with each of you. I will have you basically give me a quick run through, verbally explain all of this to me, and then I will sign it on the bottom. And then once I sign it, then you're good to go, you are approved, you can actually start creating it. Okay, does that make sense? You need to hold on to this piece of paper once it has my signature on it, because when we grade it, okay, this is on the other side, all right, and some of these things refer to things over here. So for example, 25 out of your 100 points say, does it demonstrate improvement in skills and techniques? So listing the techniques that you used on the other side, that would be this right here, your techniques, okay? 25 points, does it develop your sketchbook idea in combination with research in a high quality, complex way? In other words, does it go further than the original sketch and show research influences, but at the same time, are you making it your own? You're not just copying the research, but you're using it as influence. There's a difference, right? You're modifying that somehow. 25 points, are your design choices giving a balanced and complete overall visual effect? So in other words, is your composition interesting? Is it active? Is it well thought out where you're putting things and how they interact together to kind of lead the viewer's eye around and give your viewer a good experience? And then your last 25 points is your craftsmanship, right? Work is structurally sound, it's neat, it's fully complete, you have no unfinished surfaces, you use all available work time, and your work is presentation quality with a portfolio quality photo. That should be pretty consistent with what you've done all semester. 100-point final project. Does that make sense? What questions do you guys have? You got it? I know it's a hard day to come in on after a long weekend and then kind of get a bunch of information dumped on you. So for the rest of today, you guys have about 7 minutes. I want you to start brainstorming for this. I want you to start looking through your sketchbook and maybe earmarking some of the ideas that you think you might want to work with. Okay, you could start doing some research today. And then let's send somebody to go pick up these printouts, and you can each have one of these and actually start filling this out. And then I will be checking these in next week. Okay, so we're planting the seeds now. You have kind of this long weekend to kind of work through some of those ideas, maybe do some thumbnailing, certainly do some research, see what you can come up with. And then out of those brainstorm ideas, pick what is going to be your strongest, and then how are you going to incorporate your terms and your concepts into that. Make sense? Do you feel okay? All right, that's all I got. So you guys have a couple minutes here to kind of start thinking.